He was the leader of this warband. He, Sarvak the Butcher. And to gain such a sobriquet amongst his kind, the World Eaters, was no small feat. He had met and killed 2 others who had made the claim. In this region, he was the Butcher, and only he. Sarvak surveyed the scene below him, always constantly seething, his jaw muscles bunching and unbunching in a constant clench that made him look on the verge of berserk at every moment of every day. Should anyone glimpse the dark orbs that were his eyes, then they would confirm that this was no tic or affectation. He was, always, one slip, one slither, one insult or annoyance away from bursting into a whirlwind of violence. To be a commander of World Eaters was to live vicariously for the majority of any engagement. Where Sarvak wanted to charge bellowing into the enemy, he would do so through his berserkers, unleash his hatred via his armor and heavy firepower, and bathe in the blood of his enemies via the chain axes or blades of his band. All up until this very point, where he need restrain himself no longer. And it had been long in the coming. For hours seemingly unending, he had coordinated his army. He was still Astartes, still knew how to prosecute a war, and a battle especially, and he had taken the actions of his sire as his meter, his compass. But where the Red Angel Angron decimated for failure, Sarvak did so for strength. He would winnow out the weak amongst his band before he took his place at the gathering, the place the crusade would be called. He used the fire and fury of the enemy as his thresher, his sorter of the weak. Thus did he send waves of candidates to the front and a seemingly endless attritional grind. But it had served his purpose. Those who survived would be ready for initiation, and the enemy had been harried and harrowed exactly where he wanted them, corralled like colts into a pen of his making. And it was now time. Sarvak motioned to his men and they donned their helms, as he leapt into his waiting charger, his hateful steed, a gargantuan crab-like lower half, 6 legs protruding from a bulk, topped by a central torso with a battle cannon at its centre. Arms with heavy flamers and barbs that spun as he goaded it forward under a lash. His personal Defiler, Widow's Scream, scuttled forward at a blistering pace, and they were off. Some of his other berserkers were also atop Defilers, but few. As one, a score of Defilers, and in their wake were his power armor-clad berserkers, charged into the bottleneck they had herded their foes. The Defilers did not just advance down the main causeway, they were beneath it, hanging below the bridge, on top of its struts, and leaping from building to building, sometimes on the tops, sometimes by the sides. But the view for the defenders must have been bow-liquefying, as they began to break just at the sight of the chaos onrush. It was often like this, mused Sarvak. The last conscious thought he had before entering into the red maze, before the red mist descended on him, and all pain was lifted from him, all concerns dissolved. The butcher's nails appeased, as all was only quiet within the centre of the maelstrom, the whirlwind of the melee. The huge Defiler he stood atop led the way, and within minutes he was amongst the fleeing scum. The Defiler burnt swathes of fleeing men and women as he moved forward and picked some up. It then either instantly squashed or cut in half the struggling victim, or hurled them into comrades, bowling them over so its gouts of Promethean could envelop them all. Sarvak leapt down into any massed resistance and butchered all before him, their lasgun fire harmlessly reflecting off his power armor, their bodies offering absolutely no resistance to his chain axe, as it severed and cleft its way through squads of them, but only those brave enough to stand their ground. The Defilers and Berserkers killed and advanced so swiftly that a limited rout from their charge became a wave that they surfed through the entire district, one barricade after another falling as the onrush could not be stopped, nor even slowed. The last resistance was in the city square, as a detachment of armor surrounded the last central building, the HQ of the resistance. They did their best, firing their battle cannons at the Chaos Demon engines, but were simply outmatched. Defilers would scuttle up buildings, coming over the top out of the elevation of the tanks, or round the sides of the huge edifices around the main building, and popping in and out of cover as they approached. but they danced and scuttled their way forward closer until finally they all came out of cover as one, and were on the tanks before they could fire a second shot. The Defilers rammed tanks over, or jumped on their tops and then used their huge pincers to tear them asunder to get at the sweetmeats within. It took only moments before the last of the tank crew were being pulled apart and discarded like broken toys when their struggling ended. Sarvak looked at his handiwork, then led his berserkers within the main building. Resistance was limited, erratic, and utterly ineffectual. Very soon he would have the artifact he needed. A world dies today due to one bauble. But it was all for the greater glory of the great god Khorne. There will be many skulls for his throne this day. The Defilers now roamed the battlefield looking for more pockets of resistance, their demonic hunger insatiable. None would be permitted to live. None. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and important war gear of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we are to begin our exploration of one of the most popular demonic engines of war for quite some time. It behooves us to know what they are and what they do. They are ubiquitous in so many forces of chaos, so oft seen in the lore and on the tabletop. Of course, I speak of the Defiler. So what is it? As usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Defilers. A Defiler is a massive demon engine in the service of the traitor legions of chaos, and it is a truly potent beast of war, mounted upon 6 massive legs. It is twice the size of most other demon engines and is possessed of a temper to match. Each Defiler is roughly tank-sized, and both extremely violent in its actions and indiscriminate with who bears the brunt of its wrath. Whether using its massive battle cannon to destroy entire formations, or ripping apart enemies with its massive claws, this engine of war acts as a harbinger of utter devastation to its foes. Though their origins are lost to the ages, Defilers were created some time after the end of the Horus heresy in the early 31st millennium on the order of Abaddon the Despoiler to supplement the forces of the traitor legions, whose remaining Chaos Dreadnoughts were no longer the reliable heavy support units they had once been before their transformation into the insane cybernetic servants of the ruinous powers. Defilers are truly massive beasts of war, twice the size of most other demon engines, and with a temperament to match. The ground shivers and melts as they stalk towards their foes on 6 massive segmented legs, their great pincer arms twitching and snipping with an impatient need to slice through warm flesh. The Defiler's crab-like body supports a demonic torso that carries an array of deadly weaponry, ranging from Reaper autocannons to racks of highly explosive missiles. The battle cannon mounted in its chest turret is undoubtedly its most potent armament. Each hellforged shell that thunders out from its growling muzzle is capable of crippling a squad of Royalist Space Marines in a single earth-shaking blast. Those foes fortunate enough to survive a Defiler's barrage of shells must then face its full fury at close quarters. Built with piston-driven claws to grab and crush the enemy, and boasting whirring blades or whip-like flails mounted on articulated limbs, the Defiler charges into the foe, crushing and grinding as it smashes aside all opposition. Its mechanical growls drown out the cries of the wounded and dying. Trampled corpses and severed limbs are left scattered in a red path behind it as the Defiler rampages through the enemy's ranks. Like many of the Warpsmith's creations, a Defiler's animus is provided by a bound demon of chaos. When the immortal ire of this imprisoned entity is raised, the Defiler powers forward on its clanking legs, spewing death with its guns. The Defiler rejoices in battle, for only then can it enjoy the blissful release of slaughter. Once the feeble warriors of the corpse god have been crushed, the Defiler will once more be bound in runic chains by its masters, and dragged hissing back to the forges until it is needed once more. The rise of the Demon engine. The first Defilers were created as a result of a pact between the Dark Mechanicum and Abaddon the Despoiler before his first Black Crusade. It is said that as part of Abaddon's preparations, he quested to find an array of war engines to bring the Imperium to its knees. He desired constructs that had never before walked across a battlefield. Abaddon's need for new and horrific machines brought them to Zana II, which lay deep within the Eye of Terror. There the Magi of the Dark Mechanicum pledged their allegiance to Abaddon's cause, in exchange for rare artifacts, blood offerings, and menials. As the Despoiler dismissed his dark servants out into real space to fulfill their requests, the renegades of the Dark Mechanicum forged new creations within their citadels. Some of the oldest Defilers became legends within the slaughter fields of Abaddon's first Black Crusade. Though the Black Legion marched to war alongside countless demonic war engines, few inspired as much terror as the scuttling packs of Defilers. In year 781 Millennium 31, the people of Earthwat were to experience the full force of this new horror. Interpreters of the Emperor's Tarot foretold of a new iron monster that would come from the heavens. Such a chaos fleet entered into orbit, blackening the skies with their baroque ships. Numerous Cadian chimeras rolled out across the landscape, carrying troops to reinforce important positions and defend key cities. A contingent of the Imperial Fist's 4th and 5th Companies made planetfall shortly before the Chaos Warfleet's arrival to help prevent the planet's demise. The armies of Earthwat were at the mercy of an assault from a Black Legion warband that sought to bring nothing but mayhem to the world. Defilers churned up the waves of advancing infantry with withering gunfire, decimating bunkers and gun emplacements. Their far-reaching shells pulverized the reinforcements before they could get into the thick of the action. Whenever the forces of the Imperium fought back and a stalemate seemed to be reached on the battlefield, it was the uncanny speed and terrifying ferocity of the Defilers that broke the deadlock. The frenzied demon machines would surge forward with an unnatural thunder, peeling open the metal hulls of tanks and even dueling dreadnoughts in jaw-dropping clashes. After 4 solid days of combat, it took the full force of the Imperial Fist's 4th and 5th Companies to hold back the warband on Earthwat and force a retreat back to the orbiting ships. Eventually the Chaos Fleet vanished back into the Eye of Terror, but the legend of the Defiler had been forged in battle. By the early 32nd millennium, the Defiler had become a mainstay of the forces of the Chaos Space Marines. Warbands used them to lay waste to Imperial fortifications and lightning-fast raids. Defilers are constructed in the Soul Forges, a huge sprawl of sulphurous worlds within the Eye of Terror. Within the Immaterium, millions of the Dark Mechanicus' bleak forged citadels ring with the abominable industry of chaos. They are foul places. The warp-distressed spires of tainted foundries vanish into the skies choked with sorcerous smoke. The air on the ground is thick with garbled chanting, hideous pledges, and foul incantations that would never be uttered by the sane. The stench of rank magics lingers in labyrinthine passageways, mingling with the charred odour from protein farms. The corrupted servitors who slave away for their masters never see any light save that of the glow of magma or the sparks of sorcery. Such places are forever spawning new creations of flesh and metal to be unleashed by the forces of chaos in order to bring terror to the galaxy. On these old worlds, hidden in twisted metal and bone citadels and tainted manufactura, warpsmiths labour to create all manner of war engines. Their mechatendrils are forever whirring around them as they perform their forbidden art, and it is the Defiler that stands amongst the warpsmiths' most revered and feared creations. Strictly speaking, the body of a Defiler is not manufactured from anything new, for the obscure processes of the warpsmiths reconstitute it from warp-tainted metal wrenched from other constructs. The Defiler's ancient slab-sided metal panels have been known to possess the runic signature of ancient forge worlds that fell during the Horus Heresy, and of tech priests who have turned traitor. It is said by those within the council of the Ordo Malleus that many such panels, as well as other elements of the Defiler's technology, are originated from dreadnoughts, perverted by the hands of chaos and distorted by the warp. During this process, the warpsmith may affix all manner of weaponry to the construct. As such, Defilers have been seen crawling across the battlefield armed with havoc launchers, power scourges, power fists, and huge twin-linked heavy flamers. But central to the war engine is the battle cannon, which delivers death to all corners of a battlefield. Much of the war engine's actual construction remains incomprehensible to Imperial scholars. The only true knowledge that exists of its construction is the vile ritual performed to infuse the metal shell with a demon. Binding a warp horror to a defiler is a complex process. To summon a demon, or even a trapped soul, from deep within the immaterium requires a flesh sacrifice. Offerings can come in many forms, but for a sufficiently brutal defiler to be manufactured, a victim of profound might is necessary. It is a warrior of the Adeptus Astartes that a warpsmith most frequently demands is brought into his hellish foundry. For the ruinous powers value these offerings more highly than sacrifices of mere mortals. A prize of such strength is not easily won, and many followers of the Dark Gods will fall before a living Space Marine can be brought into captivity from the slaughter fields and into the dark heart of the Soul Forges. After a warpsmith has constructed the physical shell of the Defiler, the barely breathing Space Marine, stripped of his power armor, is bound with runic chains to the war engine. In the red glow of magma furnaces and the fog of toxic fumes, the Space Marine's black carapace is violated by arcane weaponry, and his blood oozes across the chassis of the inert Defiler. Base litanies are chanted, forbidden sorceries set free upon the victim. The loyalist hearts are stopped according to the whims of the warpsmith. The death of the Space Marine heralds the birth of the Defiler. The summoning of a demon is a precise art, but it is not unknown for a ritual to go disastrously wrong. A misplaced vowel within a litany can result not only in the instant death of the sacrifice, but of those around him. The infamous warpsmith Draxar once invited a particularly powerful demon into the Soul Forge on the demon world of Phenomia, but failed to speak the words of binding correctly. The summoned warp horror materialized within the flesh of its Space Marine offering and burst free from its sorceress restraints. It then proceeded to slaughter Draxar, as well as dozens of menials, with the warpsmith's own power axe, before vanishing back into the immaterium. A warpsmith will know that his ritual is complete when the war engine rises from its dormant state and snags against its glowing chains like a primordial beast. The Defilers exhaust, roar with defiance. The machine beast thirsts for slaughter. But the demon engine remains bound by its runic reins, kept captive to the warpsmith amidst the smoke of the forged cities, waiting to be used in a dark bargain or in dark corners of Chaos battleships. The Defiler is never dormant. Chaos fiends come to goad it, riling the demon within it into a heightened state of fury, until finally it is time for the Defiler to stampede into combat alongside the forces of Chaos. Only then can it quench its thirst for carnage. No matter which warband or legion the Defiler fights alongside, each demon engine becomes an integral part of that force. Irrespective of the different fighting styles of the various forces of Chaos, the Defiler is much sought after by Chaos lords and sorcerers, and is found in significant numbers amongst the traitor ranks. Those who fight for Khorne's favour, such as the World Eaters, are ever keen to harvest more skulls for the Blood God, and they frequently take advantage of the Defiler's hideous bloodlust. The Iron Warriors fortify their dark frontiers with many demon engines, and among them are numerous Defilers always thirsting for the counterattack. The Death Guard, too, deploy Defilers across the galaxy, each demon engine capable of quickly eliminating obstacles to deny the spread of Nurgle's maladies. Out of a curious respect for the warp horror within a war engine, the traitor legions and warbands may choose to issue Defilers with a name. Sometimes this is based upon the demon who inhabits the machine, or some archaic ritual within the ranks of Chaos, but more commonly it is a base declaration of what the engine does. In other instances, an Astra Militarum regiment who faced the Defiler's onslaught will have given it a designation. Inquisitorial records detail atrocities conducted by Defilers throughout the ages, which are attributed to an eclectic array of names, including the Alpha Legion's Hellpincer, the Purge's Rot Crusher, and the infamous Red Corsair's Engine of Mail. Enraged by its imprisonment, The demon within the engine needs to be sedated by spells of appeasement, which are only lifted when battle begins. With its full fury at its imprisonment unleashed, the demon engine drives the Defiler forward on its 6 legs, spewing death from its implanted weaponry. It rejoices in battle, ripping apart the enemy with its great claws, while emitting terrible roars of rage and delirious battle joy from its vox grills. Unconcerned for its survival since it seeks release back into the immaterium, the Defiler's bound demon ignores the blasts of missiles and detonations of artillery and bolter shells against its armoured body, advancing through the heaviest fire without hesitation. Notable Defilers. Although countless Defilers have been unleashed alongside numerous warbands and legions, certain demon engines have become notorious, and their vile deeds have been recorded. Over the millennia, these infamous Defilers have fought their way into Imperial records. The Engine of Plague. On the populous hive world of Nukon 6, the Engine of Plague became the great enabler for the Death Guard to spread the putrid disease of Nurgle. The world remained heavily defended by a robust planetary defense force and Acadian regiment, but the Engine of Plague, along with 4 other Defilers, tore apart tanks and gutted soldiers in key positions, gradually grinding down the Imperial forces. The Engine of Plague and its cohort eventually attracted the attention of the bulk of the planet's forces, wallowing in slaughter while their traitor masters infiltrated behind enemy lines. Within days, the filth of Nurgle had spread to over 100 billion people on Nukon 6. Ghost Crusher. Ghost Crusher became legend due to the horrific deeds enacted on craft-world Ilamanesh in 326 Millennium 33. A huge warband of the Night Lords descended from the darkness of the warp on a mission of revenge. Their aim was simply to eradicate the world's spirit stones, many of which had previously been stolen from the crone world of Isil-Sar. While delivering justice for this past Eldar sin, the Night Lords unleashed several Defilers. One of these, Ghost Crusher, stood out as a particularly savage machine beast. The demon engine spearheaded a Night Lord assault upon the shrine of Eldanesh, incinerating ancient tomes, crushing sacred totems, destroying spirit stones, and burning the guardians who attempted to prevent the desecration. So thorough were the Night Lords in their assault on Ilamanesh that they left the craft world a tomb, with no artifacts and no living Eldari remaining. Mikala the Insane. Mikala the Insane was considered by Imperial scholars to be one of the most ferocious Defilers ever created. In year 899 Millennium 34, it was at the forefront of a savage attempt to destroy the Blood Tiger Space Marine chapter's fortress on the jungle moon of Trijon II. A warband fleet belonging to the Tormented erupted out of the warp in a rapid deployment. 20 Defilers were amongst the spearhead on the ground, including Mikala the Insane. The demon engine burned great swathes through the fortress, so that the Tormented could bring their war to the foot of the fortress monastery's outer walls. While the Blood Tigers were forced to focus their efforts on the horror below, Helldrakes tormented the structures further up the fortress spire. Gunfire raged through the skies, with great gouts of blood and flame soaking the humid jungle down below. Only one foe from the warp managed to breach the armoured walls, and that was Mikala the Insane. The Defiler wreaked havoc inside the fortress monastery, crushing whole squads of Blood Tigers. Dreadnoughts finally reduced the demon engine to smouldering wreckage, but not before it caused significant damage. Only after Mikala's fall did the fortress of the Tormented finally retreat into the Immaterium, and the Blood Tigers were left to count their dead. Defiler variants. The Slaughter Fiend. Dedicated to Khorne, the Blood God, a Slaughter Fiend is a Defiler subjugated and ridden by a Khornate Berserker. The first recorded instance of this reckless tactic came during the campaign for the world of Eclipsion Prime, when the Berserker champion of Chaos, Akragar, of the World Eater's Traitor Legion, jumped from the ruins of a hive fleet onto the eponymous Defiler, known as Slaughter Fiend, and managed to subdue the demonic machine to his own will and ride it like a monstrous steed. Ever since, Khornate Berserkers have attempted to emulate Akragar's actions, and carve rune-etched links about the throats of the infernal vehicles, binding it to the will and rage of Khorne. competition to ride such beasts is fierce, and though many try, few succeed. In battle, whole units of berserkers will attempt to clamber onto a nearby slaughter fiend, if only to steal a ride into the fray. Typically, slaughter fiends renounce most ranged weapons in accordance with the preferences of the blood god, and are armed with additional close assault weaponry. They are often also faster than other Defiler variants, as they are as filled with bloodlust as the berserkers who ride them. Groups of slaughter fiends are known as blood packs. Desecrator. Dedicated by the Death Guard Traitor Legion to the service of the Plague Lord Nurgle, a Desecrator is a Defiler armed with a Vomit Cannon, Reaper autocannons, and Battle Claws. Debaser. A Debaser is a Defiler perverted to the Dark Prince of Pleasure, Slanesh, by the Emperor's Children Traitor Legion. It is armed with a devastating payload of sonic weaponry, including ultrasonic disruptors, a Death Wailer, and Blastmasters, as well as razor-sharp battle claws. Deceiver. When the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion dedicated a Defiler to the nefarious will of the Lord of Change, Tzeentch, it is called a Deceiver. Such vehicles make use of an array of confusing weapons, such as Tzeentch cannons, ether cannons, and heavy flamers, as well as battle claws and warp flames, which are used in close assault. Typically, Deceivers are more accurate in a ranged firefight than other types of Defilers as a result of these modifications. End quote. And it is not difficult to see why the Defiler, the warmly nicknamed Defi, is one of the mainstays of the Chaos forces across the world. Not only is it utterly devastating in the right hands, but it also cuts a fine spectacle, a worthy image on the tabletop or in the mind's eye. The otherworldliness of them, the scuttling, the insect or crab-like movements that then conclude with it amongst your men bashing and smashing to its evil heart's content. In some editions, they are absolute scourges on the battlefield, as in the last, where my regular foil, Pitotep, runs them alongside his 1,000 sons. The Defiler is a horror to face for many reasons, you see. It is tough, it is fast, it is durable, it is deadly, and it can engage at almost every range effectively. The battle cannon is a bane at long ranges, the cannons at mid-range, and the heavy flamer always makes you think twice about going in close, let alone its massive claws, which can make quick work of tanks or troops as the situation arises. So one cannot ignore a Defiler, and thus it can be a bullet magnet, a distraction carnifex, or distractifex as some would say. This is where a model, a unit, is chosen purely for its ability to look intimidating and draw as much of the enemy's fire as possible, hence allowing the rest of your force to get the objectives grabbed and the job's done. Also, because it is large and otherworldly, it is intensely gratifying to blow it off the board. The relief one feels at its exit stage left, usually smouldering in a pile of melter or las cannon fire, is also usually very short-lived, as once the immediate distraction, the Defi, is negated, your friend will then cast their eye over the rest of the board and realize the trap they have already waltzed so joyously into, as I have myself more than once to my inevitable and hilarious downfall. The many loadouts and variants make it a Swiss Army knife, able to fill whatever role you wish, as long as it includes a hearty dollop of murder and mayhem. Classic Warhammer. Terrific fun to play against or with, because they look evil. They do exactly what they say on the tin, and they defile everything in their reach. And I mean everything. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to the Chaos Defiler. If so, then do please consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then also hit the notifications button, as I would not want you to miss out. A share of the video or joining our Patreon would also go a long way to ensuring the longevity of our community here, and would be a great boon. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.